Hello everybody, this is an ongoing series examining the dungeon design in Zelda games. If you're interested, feel free to check out the previous videos in this series, but otherwise, let's hop into it. This is it, the finale for the Wind Waker. But first, the Wind Waker notoriously presents us with the Triforce Fetch quest. So this quest was teased out to us by the King of Red Lions before the Earth Temple, actually. He explains that after the Hero of Time's disappearance, the Triforce of Courage was split into 8 pieces and scattered throughout Hyrule. Now, before we can face Ganon, we have to find all 8 pieces and reassemble them. A lot of people dislike this quest, but I really enjoy it. It really plays into Wind Waker's strength, requiring you to explore the vast open world of the Great Sea, and it can be done gradually throughout the entire latter half of the game. I quite enjoy it, but this is dungeon design in Zelda, not exploring an open world design in Zelda. So I'll just say this, despite its reputation as a long slog of a fetch quest, if you like exploring and finding secrets, it's genuinely a great part of the game. And if that's not your cup of tea, well, Tingle gives you a chart so you can easily find exactly where they all are anyways. It's easy enough. Once we've got all 8 pieces, we can present the Triforce of Courage to the gods over here at the Tower of the Gods, and the Triforce piece will now dwell within Link. We can return to Hyrule, and it turns out that Ganondorf has discovered Tetra's location in the castle basement. We'll have this excellent battle against a pair of elite Darknuts, and we'll be able to head out, break this barrier surrounding the castle, follow the road through the abandoned Hyrule, and we'll find ourselves at the entrance to Ganon's tower. Ganon's Tower. If you played Ocarina of Time, then this place should have a familiar feeling. Its atmosphere is absolutely brilliant. It's dark in all the right ways, and constantly has this rising tension that really makes it feel like it's building towards something climactic. Oh, and it is. The dungeon is mostly straightforward and not too long, but it's designed in a brilliant way that recaps our adventure up until now, much in the same way that Ganon's castle in Ocarina of Time does, and then just like in that game, we have a long red carpeted staircase ascending up to the final boss. But Wind Waker's take on Ganon's castle still manages to throw in some unique elements to shake things up a bit. It's great stuff, and the architecture of this place really captures that element of danger in just the right places, as well as being ornate, mysterious, and puzzling when needed. Much like the Tower of the Gods, Ganon's Tower can be separated into a linear 3-act structure, with its 3 sections notably being distinct from each other. The first act being the sort of recap and boss rush section, the second being this labyrinth area, where we'll have to do a bit of puzzle solving, and the final act being this ascension up the tower, culminating in the final battle. Usually, I'm more of a fan of the sort of open central room-based progression structure, but when done right, this sort of dungeon progression that pushes you onward deeper into the dungeon with minimal backtracking can work really well, as we saw in the Earth Temple. And I think its potential is not squandered here at all either. Having us push forward constantly during this dungeon keeps the tension high and really makes us, the player, buy into this climactic feeling all the more. I think it's superb work. The music here is pretty great. This dungeon actually gets 2 distinct pieces of music. The one that plays during both the first and third acts, which is is the classic Ganondorf theme. It doesn't have the rising feeling that it did in Ocarina of Time, staying at a constant low tempo, but we also don't have Ganondorf literally playing his own theme song at the top of the tower this time, so that's fine. I actually enjoy that this is different and not just a complete rehash in execution of that game. Staying at that constant low makes the song moody and eerie, like danger is constantly just around the corner, but slightly out of reach, as it should be. The second track has a far more quizzical feel, which again makes sense. It's pretty mellow but has this almost Jeopardy-like quality to it, which again is perfectly suited to this section of the dungeon it is used for. The first theme is tense and moody, and plays in the sections which are mostly combat heavy. This theme, with that quizzical feel, plays during this labyrinth section, which is like one giant puzzle in itself, and so the track is a perfect fit. I can't get enough of this place. Alright, on to the progression. We'll begin the dungeon in this wonderfully foreboding foyer room, with this Ganon mural on the door. Through the door, we'll find ourselves in this bridge room, which acts in the same way as the main floor of Ganon's castle in Ocarina of Time. We have a barrier blocking our progress in the form of this door, and in order to proceed, we'll have to explore the 4 areas in each direction of the room, which have a brief section with elements from the 4 main dungeons of the game, including their bosses. Those being Dragon Roost Cavern, the Forbidden Woods, the Earth Temple, and the Wind Temple. There appear to be no elements tying to Forsaken Fortress, but that's fine, we already went there twice, and no ties to Tower of the Gods, which also makes sense because Ganon really had nothing to do with that place anyways. So these 4 sections it is. You can do them in any order you like, as long as you do them all, but for me, I like to just do them in the original dungeon order, which just happens to be clockwise from where you start. So if we take that approach, it's the Dragon Roost Cavern section first, which has a short hallway which you will need to use the grappling hook to cross over the lava. At the end of it, we'll have a rematch with Goma, who you can defeat in the exact same way as before. In fact, that is mandatory, as we are briefly stripped of any inventory items that we wouldn't normally have during this section of the game anyways. Once she is defeated, we'll be warped back to the bridge room, where we can head into the next section. Next is the Forbidden Woods section. There's a rotor switch to activate this gondola and some platforms to cross using the Deku Leaf. Nothing too challenging. We'll cross and have a rematch with Caldemos, who, just like Goma, will defeat via the same method as before, using the boomerang. Next is the Earth Temple themed section. This one is probably the most fleshed out of the 4. There's this long, narrow hallway which is lined with coffins, most of which are empty, but there's a handful of enemies to be found, including Redeads, Bubbles, and even Astolfos shows up. Once we make it through the first section of the hallway, we'll go up these stairs and find a second long, narrow hallway. The next staircase is closed off, so in order to activate this switch, we need to reflect light onto one of these choo-choos and have them hold down the switch. Then do it all over again for the next staircase, except that the switch is farther away now, adding a bit of urgency. I love that. Watch out for the Stalfos, and we can have a rematch against Jalhala, who is still too easy. The final section here is themed after the Wind Temple. This one has a much shorter hallway. We can use the springboard to float over this gap, then the same for this one. Just make sure to stick to the side here so that you don't get blown downward from these fans. And then hookshot up to the door. Easy. We'll fight Molgera again and be warped back. Now, with all 4 bosses defeated, the barrier will crumble and we'll be able to move forward through the dungeon. Act 1 complete. Just a thought here, these sections are pretty short, but I do like the way that they recapped the previous dungeons, and this sort of grayscaling effect is pretty cool. It's also pretty tolerable because despite it being a sort of boss rush mode, now that we have the powered up Master Sword, we're actually stronger, making the boss fights easier and quicker than the first time that we faced them. But alright, Act 2 kicks off with this staircase filled with mini Blins, who you can dispatch easily. We'll next come into this round room, which is the first in this labyrinth section. There are 4 doors, one in each cardinal direction. That includes the one that we just came through. The one straight ahead can't be opened yet. You'll find in the 2 side doors are these matching rooms. One with these lanterns on the wall, which the game makes painstakingly obvious, is a hint, and in the opposite room we'll see corresponding switches, which we need to activate in accordance with the order of torches on that wall. This is a cool puzzle. I love using environmental context clues to figure things out like this, but the game goes to such lengths to make this hint obvious to you, including these little camera zooms. Oh well. If we activate the switches, it'll open this handy portal, which actually takes us back up to the surface of the ocean, apparently being the portal Ganondorf had been using to travel between Hyrule here and the Great Sea above. Neat. It's a gaming mechanic that has actual lore reasoning. However, that's just a shortcut out and back into the dungeon. That last door in the round room still won't budge. So where else can we go? No idea how I ever figured this out as a kid. Maybe it was by accident, but there's these 2 rooms, right? This one here has water and this portal that we opened. The other does not have water, but the shape of the room is otherwise mirrored. So maybe this gap acts as a portal too. And yes, it does. We jump down this chasm and we are teleported into the labyrinth section. Just before you do that, make sure to read this stone tablet with this great hint at figuring the labyrinth out. It reads, "The sword hilt of my servant shall be the guideposts that point to me." Now what could that mean? We'll get to it. Landing in this room, we'll be ambushed by Phantom Ganon. Yeah, since he's sort of ditched back in Forsaken Fortress, we now get the chance to take him on again. The battle is pretty much the same as before, being a classic match of Dead Man's Volley. In other words, reflecting these energy bolts back and forth until it hits him, then striking him with your sword to deal damage when he's grounded. He also now employs this new charged attack, which sends several energy bolts at once to you. In order to reflect that, you'll want to use a spin attack. This is a bit trickier to pull off here in Wind Waker, since charging up the spin attack will unleash the Hurricane Spin, which is not what we actually want, so make sure to time it carefully. After landing a few blows, he'll retreat, dropping his sword in the process. This is where the hint from that stone tablet comes into play. As his sword drops, the hilt will land pointed to one of the 4 doors in the room, and that is the correct door to proceed through. Going through any other door will just lead you into a dead-end room where you get ambushed by a bunch of enemies. Following the hint into the correct room takes you through the correct path. Phantom Ganon will spawn in each room, and you can battle him briefly so that you can see which way his sword lands and move onward. I know this sounds a bit repetitive, I think you have to fight him like 5 or 6 times, but honestly, I never get tired of fighting this guy. Phantom Ganon is one of my favorite mid-bosses in the series, and every time his music chimes in, a theme song which is an absolute bop by the way, I just get so pumped for the battle. Eventually we'll come into this room, and after battling him again, we'll get the dungeon item. Yes, the dungeon item. Light arrows. The light arrows make their return here once again, but Wind Waker might have one of my favorite depictions of this staple item. You can just feel the raw power emanating from them. If you head through the door, we'll end up back in the first round room at the start of the labyrinth with those 2 portal rooms on either side, and Phantom Ganon will show up for one more fight. However, we now have the incredibly OP light arrows, so we can just one-shot him to finally finish him off in this absolutely satisfying moment. Now we can pick up his sword and use it to destroy that door that we couldn't open before, and move onward. Act 2 done. Act 3 begins, and we now have this classic, long, foreboding staircase. I love it. This passage is littered with tough baddies, but now that we have the absolutely overpowered light arrows, we can literally one-shot any and all of them, including those elite dark nuts. I never get tired of this. If you choose not to use the light arrows, you can have some pretty fun combat challenges here, but if you'd rather conserve your hearts or just want to breeze through here, you have the means to do so. Plus, there are plenty of jars around here for magic drops anyways. Finally, after a long climb up and battling all of these enemies, the door unlocks and we can head into the boss room. Here we go. Ganondorf, finally. We'll find him hunched over Tetra, and after some dialogue, he seemingly morphs into some sort of monstrosity, which might make you think it's time to battle his Ganon form right away, but that's actually not the case. This is Puppet Ganon. So yeah, it's not actually Ganon that we fight. It's a puppet, as the name implies. The music here is pretty standard boss fight music, but that's fine. I've never been the biggest fan of this battle overall, but it's not terrible either. It's a perfectly serviceable pre-final boss fight, and the vibe here is pretty good, especially seeing the reflections in the water. Love that detail. There's a few phases to this battle, but in this form, here's what we'll want to do. You can use the boomerang to cut the blue strings on the puppet, and his weak point is the blue orb on his tail, which you will want to hit with a light arrow. Pretty simple. If you're worried about arrows or magic drops, the game has you covered there as well, as keys will spawn in periodically and will drop supplies as needed. Otherwise, 3 hits with the light arrows should do the trick, and we're on to the next phase of the battle. He'll drop back down, this time as some sort of weird Ganon spider puppet. Ugh, gross. As he raises into the air and drops down, you can actually watch his reflection in the water to see how he'll land, and position yourself behind him so that you can aim at his weak point. Easy enough to do. In fact, this might be the easiest of the 3 phases to this battle. Just like before, 3 hits with the light arrows will do, and we're on to phase 3. This time he's more like a weird Ganon snake puppet, and this is the most annoying version of the battle. He's really quick and basically doesn't stop moving, making that weak point even harder to hit. But you can actually throw down some all-purpose bait, which will distract him so that you can land a blow to his weak point. I have to say, I'm not really a big fan of this particular part of the battle, but hey, at least it's over pretty quick. Once Puppet Ganon is destroyed, we'll see the actual Ganondorf with Tetra in tow up in the rafters. We can climb up this rope and use the grappling hook and hook shot, and we'll find a door at the very top of this chamber. Heading through, Ganondorf will lament a bit before totally beating us. He's able to extract the Triforce, completing the set of sacred triangles. But before he can use the power of the Triforce to make his desires a reality, old kingly man here steps in and wishes on the Triforce instead, absolutely undercutting Ganondorf's big moment. The king wishes for hope and a future for the children. As the water begins to flood in, Ganondorf laughs in this menacing, evil way before going full murder mode on us. I love this moment when Tetra cuts in, still with the sass. Damn, I just love these characters. So this is it for real, the real final battle against Ganondorf. Tetra will borrow our bow and use light arrows to fight alongside us during the battle, instead of just, standing on the sidelines. Awesome. This battle is incredible. The atmosphere of the water rushing in, flushing away the last remnants of Hyrule, and this music. It is one of my favorite final battle tracks of ever. Just listen for yourself at this glorious climactic piece. I don't throw the word epic around often because I think the word got verbally beaten to death a decade ago, but I'll make an exception here. This song is epic. The battle itself is this incredible sword fight. Ganondorf wields 2 blades, and he's pretty agile and skilled with them. You can really feel his bloodlust at this point. It's just incredible. He'll come at you pretty aggressively, and he does well to block most of your attacks, and even counters them with his own. It's superb, especially in how brutal it can be. So my recommendation is to have some of Grandma's soup handy, just in case. The best bet is to be relentless and attack him constantly, even as he continually blocks. You'll end up either getting a hit or 2 through, or getting the chance to use a parry to get around his defenses, although he might block that too. Either way, keeping him busy with your barrage of attacks opens the opportunity for Tetra to use the bow to fire light arrows at him, which, if they land, will stun him and leave him vulnerable to attack. Just be careful because if she misses, she might actually hit you instead. Either way, keep at him and you'll break those defenses eventually. I gotta say, I love how dynamic this fight truly feels. Most boss battles have such telegraphed patterns and such a gamey sort of rhythm and feel to them. This fight does not. Ganondorf rarely telegraphs his attacks. He blocks constantly and is brutal when returning with his own blows. For context, during my entire playthrough of this game, I only ever died here in Dragon Roost Cavern in a complete freak accident in which I absolutely should not have died to Keese, but I was being an idiot, and a second time again in the Savage Labyrinth, which is a mini dungeon that pits you through 50 floors against wave after wave of enemies. Then I had a fairy, so it was no problem really. Against Ganondorf, I used 2 fairies and half of my grandma's soup, just because of how much more aggressive he is than any other bosses. I love it. He should be this hard. I mean, this guy's earned that reputation by this point. After getting hit enough, he wises up to what's going on and decides to go after Tetra, knocking her out. You'll have to keep at him on your own for a bit, locking blades for a while longer, until Tetra finally wakes up. She'll try sniping him again, but he'll now dodge those attacks too. So Tetra will chime in and cleverly devise a strategy. She'll aim for you, and you use the mirror shield to reflect the light arrows to Ganondorf for a surprise attack. Just make sure not to move too much while she does this, or she'll miss. Doing so successfully will stun him, and you'll get the prompt to use a parry, which ends the battle. Holy f***. Link plunges the Master Sword straight into Ganondorf's skull in what may be one of the most brutal deaths in Zelda history. Nearly the entire blade piercing his forehead, with Link having put his entire weight into this strike, burying the blade of evil's bane here. Ganondorf remarks one final time that the wind blows before he's turned to stone, finally dead. With this over, the king apologizes for the events that have transpired. Tetra offers for him to come along with them in their ship to find a new Hyrule, but he declines, instead staying behind as the last remnant of Hyrule is buried beneath the sea. Link and Tetra come to at the surface with the pirate crew there. Credits roll, giving us this beautiful song, and in this final post-credit scene, Link embarks with Tetra to find a new land to settle in, with Tetra saying the wind will guide them. So that's the dungeon, and that's the end of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Oh man, this game is so fantastic. While this dungeon is seemingly not all that complex, it's the right amount of tension, challenge, and throwbacks, all capped off with an incredibly climactic final battle. It's emotional, it's atmospheric, it's tense, it's beautiful. Some stray thoughts before we call it a wrap on The Wind Waker. I love the fluidity of the combat with these parry techniques. Just look at the dynamic flow of battles like these. I love how well Link's inventory evolves and how integrated most of these items are with the world itself. Almost none of them get underutilized. I love this sprawling open world and how ready the series was at this time to cast its past aside and move forward in a new direction. I love how ambitiously different this game is. I love how this game, despite being built on Ocarina of Time's legacy, stands on its own merits. Tetra is a fantastic character, not just for her sassiness. She's just a genuinely well-written character, and the fact that she fights alongside you in the final battle is great. Link is also really great in this game. He's super expressive in all of his animations. He'll always look over at points of interest and things like that. You can see how when you move Link, he always leads with his eyes a little. It's all these tiny little neat details that make this game feel so alive. So that's it. Overall, I loved my time with The Wind Waker. This has got to be one of the most overlooked and underappreciated Zelda games out there. Its dungeons have been an absolute pleasure to dissect, and I'm sort of sad that it's already over. But hey, if you're curious, maybe give the game a go, because there's more to this game than its dungeons. It's got a great open world that is really worth exploring. But hey, there's more games and more dungeons to examine. So yes, dungeon design in Zelda will continue very soon. Originally, my plans were to cover Twilight Princess next, but since Skyward Sword HD just released for Switch, I'm going to be delving into that game next. So next time, join me as we travel to the very start of the Zelda timeline to look at the dungeon designs of Skyward Sword. Thank you so much for watching this video. I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you to those who supported me on Patreon. In particular, those who supported at the cheese tier or higher. And that includes Tetra, Brenda, Justin, Callie, Finley, and Grey Mage. Thank you all so much for the support, and I will catch you next time. Bye bye!